You usually see me behind the scenes if you've tuned in online before, but my name's Jacinta Denveston and I'm here from Melbourne University and I organise these lectures every 2 weeks. So if you're interested in coming along, they're not necessarily for year 11 and 12 students. Everybody who's interested in physics is welcome. This is our second last for this semester and we're extremely privileged to have a very special guest today, Professor Susana Guatello.
Perfect.
Guatelli,
yeah.
Excellent. Who has come all the way from the University of Wollongong and is from the engineering department and teaches into physics.
Yes.
And does some really cool stuff about our journey to Mars if we were ever to make it. So that's what we're here for tonight. Really super special guest today because Susana is also the Australian Institute of Physics Women in Physics lecturer for this year. Now, it's a pretty special privilege. It's, this is a program that highlights some amazing Australian researchers in physics and she's touring around the whole of Australia. She was telling me her itinerary before and it's crazy, but she's on a mission to visit as many schools, students and university students as she possibly can this year all around Australia. So I am going to hand it over to Susana to tell her all about your work.
Yes, thank you. A mission to Mars has been identified as the main goal of human exploration of the solar system, and this has been defined in the Global Exploration Roadmap that you can find online and which has been drafted by 14 space agencies, including nowadays also the Australian Space Agency. So the roadmap started with the International Space Station, which is this lab, let's say, that rotates around the Earth. And there is a research in physics, material science, in life sciences. And this research is aimed to develop methodologies, processes, technologies that can then make that enable a long-term presence of astronauts in space, in long-term missions like the one envisaged in few years on the moon. The roadmap, in fact, defines as an intermediate goal to establish a permanent human outpost on the moon. And again, this lab will be used to study technology, to perform research that then can enable a longer mission to Mars. So the roadmap culminates with the journey to Mars, which should take place the next decades. And I will show to you this design of a mission that has been provided by NASA. There are various scenarios, and I decided to pick this one simply because it's the one I studied, okay? So a human mission to Mars would consist of about 6-7 months of travel to the red planet, provided the current technology. Then the astronauts, that would be about 6-7 people, would remain on the red planet for 1 year, or 1 year and a half. And finally, they come back to the Earth with another trip of 6-7 months. So we talk here about long-term astronaut missions. So you have to think that the maximum duration of an astronaut mission on the International Space Station is 6 months. Here we talk about a 3 years mission to Mars. Okay, so it's a different span of time. And there are risks associated to astronauts' Earth. Mainly 3 have been identified by NASA. First of all, physiological problems caused by a reduced gravity. When we are on the moon or Mars, gravity is less when we are on their surface. And the reduced gravity make our bones brittle and our muscles become more weak. Then there are psychological problems. Imagine to spend 3 years of your life with a cohort of other 6 individuals, and that's it, okay? So there is a problem caused by isolation. And finally, there are risks associated to the exposure to a harsh radiation environment. So let's see. I will talk more about these risks, the acute and late risks caused by exposure to cosmic radiation. There are, I know, you all, almost all have a physics background, okay? Isn't it? Do you all study physics? Okay, so I will avoid to ask you what is radiation, if you allow to me. There are 2 main sources of radiation that have been identified as harmful for astronauts' health. The first one is the solar particle events. Solar particle events are generated by solar coronal mass ejections, which are more intense during solar maxima. As you know, the sun goes through an 11 years cycle, and solar particle events are emitted with a higher frequency, up to several per day during a solar maximum. Solar particle events, unfortunately, are unpredictable. And we are on Earth, so, and we are screened by the natural geomagnetic fields, and therefore this cosmic radiation doesn't reach us, let's say, on the Earth, and we are shielded by solar particle events. However, if you have a transfer vehicle carrying astronauts to the moon or Mars, and they encounter a solar particle event, the astronauts may have acute radiation effects, such as nausea and vomiting, but in worst case scenario, they can die in 1 hour, okay? Then there are galactic cosmic rays. Galactic cosmic rays pervade isotropically the space, and they have an origin from supernova explosions. While solar particle events are mainly protons, well, galactic cosmic rays are about 75% protons, 25% helium alpha particles, and then the rest, let's say 1%, we have the heavier species. So the most common heavier nuclei are carbon ions, oxygen, so nuclei, so they are all nuclei, carbon, oxygen, silicon, iron, nuclei. And they are more intense at solar minimum. This happens because at solar maximum, the solar wind is stronger and swipes better, scatters away more efficiently the galactic cosmic rays. Again, on Earth, by an Earth point of view, we are protected by the geomagnetic field. Space radiation can cause effects in microelectronics in satellites, okay? But here, the topic of my talk today is on radiation hazards to astronauts, to human beings. So I will focus on this. The galactic cosmic rays can produce late effects, chronic effects of radiation. They increase the risk of cancer. They can produce diseases to the central nervous and cardiovascular systems. And then there is a big problem between on Mars and on the moon. While the Earth has a magnetic field that shields us from the harsh radiation environments, well, Mars doesn't have a magnetic field, and not even the moon has one. So the moon and Mars miss this natural protection. In addition, there is a problem that when the cosmic radiation is incident, on the planetary surface, the nuclear interactions there will produce, of the cosmic radiation with the soil, will produce a secondary radiation field, which also can produce harmful effects in astronauts. In particular, we are very concerned with a production of neutrons that can have harmful effects in the astronauts. How do we study the effects of radiation in astronauts? Well, we look at the early damage in the DNA. So the DNA is the sensitive target to radiation, and this slide wants to summarize the fundamental physicochemical mechanism of radiation damage at the DNA level, okay? So radiation can interact directly with the DNA helix and can deposit directly energy and produce a break, or can produce free radicals via physicochemical interactions, and these free radicals also can break the DNA helix. And as many of you know, the more strand breaks we have, the more the damage, let's say, is clustered, and therefore the cell will not manage to repair this damage, but actually the cell may mutate, for example, to cancer, or may eventually die. And this slide shows the problem, one of the core problems of radiation protection of astronauts. Again, these are results of NASA. So at NASA, scientists have done an experiment where they irradiated mammalian cells with different sources of radiation, and they counted the number of double-strand breaks. And the double-strand breaks then have been dyed. And you can see here the results of the radiobiological experiments with the source of gamma rays. If you can see, the double-strand breaks here, represented by these green dots, are more sparse in the cell nucleus. And this damage, then let's see instead the case of an irradiation with silicon and iron nuclei, okay, that you find in space. You don't find in our radiation environment on Earth, but you find in space. And you can see that the double-strand breaks are more, follow, first of all, more the trajectory of the incident particle. And then we can see that the damage is a lot more complex than in the case of gamma radiation. So it's important to understand that the radiation in space is very different from the natural background or the radiation that we have on Earth, okay? And that heavier nuclei, like a silicon and iron nuclei, have a denser track structure which produces more cluster damage. What does it mean that the track is more dense? Look here, this is a photographic emulsion which has been irradiated with different particles, starting from protons, and then we increase the atomic number up to iron. And you can see that the more we go to the right of, of this figure, you can see that the track structure becomes more dense, and that we have more secondary electrons which are produced during the path. And therefore, the more we go to the right, we have more, let's say, damage to the cell nucleus. Unfortunately, our knowledge becomes of the biological effects, of radiobiological effects of cosmic radiation. Our knowledge gets poorer when we move to the right of this figure, okay? Because the experiments that we have in this context are more limited. So a big branch in radiobiology is and for space applications is to study more in depth, and also to understand and to develop models that better describe the radiobiological damage of cosmic radiation. I do some part of my research in that context. I will not talk about this here today, but maybe in another talk if Jacinta will invite me. Okay, so again, as many of you, but how can know? We needed to translate nanoscopic effects in a physical quantity that we can use operationally. I can't go to the astronaut and say, look, the number of double-strand breaks in your DNA has jumped up, you know, it's a little bit strange. But what we can relate to, we can use a physical quantity, which is the dose equivalent, that actually is a lot easier to use in everyday life, okay? So the dose equivalent in physics is a measure of the biological damage to living tissue as a result of radiation exposure. The dose equivalent is calculated as the absorbed dose times Q. Absorbed dose is the energy deposited in an object of mass m, and then we divide the energy deposition by the mass of that object. So the unit of measurement is joule over kilogram, which is gray. Q then, a dose equivalent is equal to absorbed dose times Q. Q is a quality factor which takes into account that different types of radiation and with different energy can produce a different biological damage. The fact is that there is a lot of research to improve the knowledge of Q for cosmic radiation, because again, we know the effects of radiation on Earth, but not in space. So if we consider the dose equivalents, so for general public, as you may know, the limits established by the law is 1 millisievert per year. More or less, it corresponds to 10 chest X-rays, okay, roughly. Then a radiation worker can have 20 millisieverts in 1 year. 6 months on the International Space Station give to the astronaut about 100 millisieverts, more or less, okay, which is about 1,000 chest X-rays. And we estimate that 1 year mission on the moon will give to astronauts about 350 millisieverts. Now, my question is for you, how, and Dan can't answer, what do you think is our estimate of the dose equivalence corresponding to a 3 years mission to Mars? No takers?
I'm guessing about 6,000.
6,000 astronaut dies in 1 second. Okay, so a 3 years mission on Mars following our estimates correspond to about 1,000, 1,500 millisievert and so on. But again, because our knowledge of the cosmic radiation and of its effects in the astronauts is still so limited, that actually the variability, I mean, this is simply an estimate of 1,500. It could be a little bit more, it could be more, or it could be less, I don't know, but definitely could be more. So just to give you an idea, for a career limit for a 35-year-old female astronaut as established by NASA is about 1,800 millisieverts, while for a male astronaut is about 2,500. So, and these are career limits. So we risk that for 1 single mission to Mars, we give the entire dose equivalent of the astronaut for the entire career. And then who knows, maybe in 1 single mission, if our estimates of dose equivalents are wrong, actually we could give more dose equivalent to the astronaut. And imagine if the astronauts go through a solar particle event. Okay, so it's very important to refine our knowledge of those equivalents in emission to Mars. I'd like to mention that female astronauts have lower limits because females have a higher cancer risk in breast. Okay. In this picture, I like to mention, just to give you an order of magnitude, if an astronaut or anyone, okay, gets a 5,000 millisievert in a very short exposure, has a 50% probability to die, okay, within 1 month because of the exposure to radiation. This is just to give you an idea of the numbers we play with. Okay, and this slide again shows to you the problem, again, of improving our knowledge of the cosmic radiation effects in astronauts. This plot shows the percentage risk of cancer death due to exposure to radiation. So these intervals, like in the International Space Station mission, you see the cancer risk here is determined with a 95% confidence limit interval. So it means that the percentage risk for International Space Station mission is between 0.1 and 2% of cancer death. Okay? And this is okay, let's say, because for astronauts we have a 3% cancer risk as defined by NASA. The astronaut career limit, sorry, this should be here. Astronaut career limit is about 3%. But when we look at a lunar colony or a Mars mission, actually our estimate of the percentage risk of cancer death, our knowledge is a lot less, our knowledge is not very, it's not accurate, and actually we could overpass the limits established by NASA by astronauts. So look for a Mars mission, for example. For Mars mission, the risk of cancer death in percent can be with a 95% probability between, let's say, 2% and 20%. 1% or 20%. So, you know, if we go to an astronaut and we say, you know, because you go to Mars, you have 1% risk to die because of exposure to radiation, okay? But if it's 20% probability to die because you are exposed to radiation, maybe, you know, astronauts will think more if they want to go to Mars or not. So a lot of research is performed in order to be able to estimate better this risk of cancer death. And this research includes physicists, chemists, radiobiologists, biologists. So it's a multidisciplinary research. So let's see what we have to do to improve our knowledge of, let's say, of the risk of astronauts in space mission. We need to improve our knowledge of the space radiation environment, of its interaction with matter in general, and also to understand more in depth the biological damage caused by cosmic radiation in tissues. Then we have to be able to measure, calculate those equivalents more precisely. We need to develop better radiation monitoring systems. And we can also design shielding solutions. And I would like to show to you some of my research that address these 3 points: calculation of those equivalents, how to development of radiation monitoring system, and how to design shielding solutions. As I told you before, the radiation environment on Earth is very different from space. We have nuclear facilities on the Earth, like the NASA Space Radiation Lab, and the closer one is in Chiba, close to Tokyo, in Japan, where we have high energy heavy nuclei beams like silicon or iron, and these beams are used to perform research for space. So they do radiobiological experiments, they expose also microelectronics or new sensors that can be used in space. The problem of this facility is that the problems of these facilities is that they can reproduce only a limited set of cosmic radiation energies, okay? So there is no facility on Earth that can reproduce the complexity of the mixed radiation fields that we have. And the cosmic radiation, the galactic cosmic rays, the energy, that we study goes as an energy from 1 MeV up to the TeV. So the order of magnitude, the cosmic radiation has an energy span that covers many orders of magnitudes. So what we use physics simulations, okay? So, and this is my field of research, to develop physics simulations to solve different types of problems, including radiation protection of astronauts. Let me take a step back to beautiful Monte Carlo. So I'm talking here about Monte Carlo, not only because it's close to the place where I was born. I'm not as rich as Monte Carlo people, but so Monte Carlo, because the physics, radiation physics simulations, they are all that we use in radiation physics and are very powerful, are based on Monte Carlo methods. And as the Monte Carlo method is based on the use, on the generation of random numbers in order to solve complex problems. Do you do a Monte Carlo lab in your physics labs? No? Ah, so, va bene, it's okay. You will come more at the Jump for Schools that I organize. So so Monte Carlo method is extremely used in radiation, not only in radiation physics, but actually also in economics, in engineering, and it's this class, let's say, of algorithms that solve complex problems using the generation of random numbers. And the story says that at the end of the Second World War, Stanislav Ulam, he was a mathematician working in the US, and the story, I don't know if it's a legend, but the story says that he was very sick at home and he was very bored. And he solved the solitaires, shuffled the cards and solved the solitaires. And he asked to himself, which is the probability to win a solitaire game? And he is a mathematician, okay, so very strong in maths, and he tried with combinatorial methods and so on. And he realized that mathematically it's a too difficult problem if we use an analytical approach, okay, if we want to use analytical formula. But then he said, okay, the method to solve this problem is shuffle the cards, and they are the randomization. I shuffle the cards, and actually I play a number n of solitaire games, and then I will calculate the probability to win. So we will see how many times we win the games, and we divide by the total number of games. But Stanislav, at a certain point, he had to go back to work. He cannot stay home playing solitaire all day long, trying to calculate this probability, okay? So, by the way, for a large number of games, of solitaire games, actually the value of the probability P that is calculated actually approaches its true value. But so he didn't have a lot of time to spend playing solitaire games, but he said, why we do not simulate playing cards with a computer? Because at that time, it was lucky, I mean, that was the period of the development of the first computer, the ENIAC. As you can see, it's a lot bigger than our laptop and definitely less powerful than your laptop. Why do I show this slide? Because it's important to understand that a practical use of Monte Carlo method to solve physics problems has been enabled by the development of computers. If there were no computers, I mean, to use the Monte Carlo method, I mean, good luck. You need So this is the thing. So how we use a Monte Carlo method in radiation physics? So in few words, and I tell you, there are books on this, and I can suggest to you some. So what we do, we use random numbers to sample particle trajectories according to given interaction probabilities. We know the cross sections, no? We are among physicists. We know the probabilities of some interactions to take place. Well, we use random numbers to sample these probabilities. We use random numbers to see, okay, I have a particle, which is the next interaction points. And I use the Monte Carlo method to do that. And then I will use it to see which interaction will take place and which secondary particles will be generated and so on. And here you see a 2 MeV beta particle, an electron that has been generated from this point O in a Monte Carlo simulation, okay? And you can see different tracks of electrons in air. And actually the Monte Carlo method is very suitable for radiation physics problems because it's based on random numbers and actually it's very good in describing the stochastic nature of particle trajectories. If you see here, we have many electron trajectories. They all have the same initial condition in terms of energy, position, and direction, but they all have different trajectories at the end in the air. This is an example of what we mean with the stochastic nature of radiation, okay? And the Monte Carlo method, because it's based on the generation of random numbers, on sampling of probabilities, actually manages to describe the stochastic nature of particle interaction. Well, JAM4 is a Monte Carlo code for radiation physics, which was born at the end of the 90s, and it's in C++. This is the web page. It's an object-oriented, uses the object-oriented technology. And it was developed initially as a collaboration among CERN, SLAC, and KK. And it was the re-engineering of JAM3. For JAM3, incredibly, I'm too young to talk about JAM3. JAM3 is using Fortran. And again, was for high energy physics applications. So in the 90s, JAM3 has been translated to C++ and object-oriented, which is a lot more powerful approach in computing science. And it's developed by an international scientific collaboration of about 100 researchers. And I'm part of this collaboration since 2002. So I've done my master in my degree in nuclear physics in Genova in Italy. And then I was lucky enough that I got a scholarship to go at CERN and I worked in a team to translate JAM4 that was born for high energy physics application and translate it and to make it usable for medical physics applications and including also radiation protection of astronauts. So actually my PhD was paid by the European Space Agency in order to study the usability and develop functionality in JAM4 for radiation protection of astronauts. So, so nowadays, so JAM4 can be used in medical physics applications. So we use it for shielding, for radiation protection studies, shielding studies, or to improve radiotherapy treatments, to improve nuclear medicine applications, and it's also extremely used in space science. It's the Monte Carlo, the code for radiation physics that is used as standard at the European Space Agency. And it's also starting now to be used at NASA to characterize their missions. Because the simulations, JAM4 simulations, but in general Monte Carlo simulations for radiation physics, allow to identify and solve problems before launching technology in space. So it helps to save up money. Then it allows to perform studies which are not possible with current particle accelerator technology. And let's tell it, it's cheap as well, because it's software. Jump4, you can download it from the web and use it. So what is my research? So I'm a team leader of the Center for Medical Radiation Physics, which is now it's called the research powerhouse of the University of Wollongong. And my theme is Monte Carlo simulations. And since 2002, I contributed to improve Jump4, okay? Then Jump4 is distributed once per year, and it's extremely used in physics, okay? Since 2018, I coordinate the release of a category of Jump4, which is called the Advanced Examples, and that describes the use of Jump4 in specific application scenarios spanning from high energy physics to space science and medical physics. I lead the so-called G4Med project, which aims to improve Jump4 for medical physics applications, and I coordinate in this work about the work of 50 researchers all around the world on this. And then finally, at the Center for Medical Radiation Physics, I support, I develop research based on Jump4. For example, now I'm trying to use Jump4 to develop a treatment planning system for microbeam radiation therapy at the Australian synchrotron. Okay, so I do radiation protection in space, but I also do other types of research. And then, yes, so I do studies from improving radiotherapy treatments to radiation protection. I have about 10 students per year. So I supervise more or less 10 PhD students and 2-3 honors per year. And David is our postdoc that supports me. I will show to you some results that we got in radiation protection of astronauts. And let me acknowledge the other contributors. So we have distinguished Professor Anatoly Rosenfeld, who is the head of the Center for Medical Radiation Physics. Then postdoctoral fellows Lynn Tran and David Bose, and our victims, PhD students, Stefania Peracchi and Matthew Large. So we developed the Jump4. So the research that I will show to you now is supported by 2 ESA contracts, okay? So it's a very, yes, now there is a more, nowadays is really a hot period for missions to Mars, let's say, for human missions to Mars. So the first thing we have done in our Jump4 simulation is to model the Columbus module. That is the astronaut habitat on the International Space Station. And we modeled it with as much detail as we could. Then we modeled the cosmic radiation incident on the International Space Station. And these are the tracks of only 10 galactic cosmic rays protons, just for your reference. Here the cylinder is open-ended, but the Columbus module, the real simulation is an enclosed cylinder, okay? And then what we do, we calculate the energy deposition, dose equivalents inside the Columbus module. And if you see that if we increase the number of galactic cosmic rays that we model and that they are incident on the Columbus module, you can see that the radiation field becomes more complex. So here we encounter problem number 1. In radiation protection in space. So let's suppose we have a high energy galactic cosmic ray, like this green track here. So when it interacts with the materials of the multi-layer of the Columbus module, because of nuclear interactions, it will produce a secondary particle shower. It will produce photons represented by this yellow line. It will produce neutrons, which are represented by these blue lines, and nuclei, like this is a think an aluminum nucleus, which is represented by this pink line. So a very important thing to studying shielding solutions for radiation protection of astronauts is to use appropriately specific materials, okay? Because this high energy cosmic radiation actually will produce this secondary radiation field that also could contribute to the harmful effects of radiation on astronauts. And one of the goals of my PhD, and then now it's very well established, is that if we use hydrogen-rich materials, that to use hydrogen-rich materials is better for passive shielding, we call it. Because with the hydrogen-rich materials, we can moderate better secondary neutrons, and the incident cosmic radiation produces less nuclear fragments. So typically, the transfer vehicles, they are made of, no, the traditional design is to use aluminum. Well, hydrogen-rich materials are better. Where do you find hydrogen-rich materials? One example is polyethylene that you find in your grocery bags or in your plastic bottles, water bottles. So this is a very important point. Then we calculated with the Jump4 simulation the dose and dose equivalents in a 1 centimeter radius of tissue equivalent sphere for 1 day mission on the International Space Station, and we calculated the dose and dose equivalent for galactic cosmic rays, protons, alpha particles, solar particle events protons, and trapped protons. And then what we done, we compared to experimental measurements that we found in the literature that were done on the International Space Station, and we found a good agreement. And when we say we find a good agreement, it means that within a factor of 2, okay? We look at the, within a factor of 2 or 3. Because because there are so many uncertainties in the radiation field, in the knowledge of the cosmic radiation interactions with the matter and so on, that we are still at that level of agreements. So within 2, a factor of 2 or 3, not within 10%. Okay. Then what we done, but this is a very important point. When you develop Monte Carlo simulations to solve a radiation physics problem, you have always to compare to experimental measurements to see how accurate is your model, because otherwise you have garbage in, garbage out, okay? We always have to quantify the accuracy of our model. And then we substituted our plastic sphere with a more realistic anthropomorphic phantom. This is the ICRP 110 Phantom, which has been published in the literature, and now you can download it from Jump4, you can use it. And we can calculate the dose equivalents in all the voxels, and the tissues of each voxel correspond to the organ. Yeah, so we can, so this of course is a more detailed, detailed anthropomorphic phantom. And we noticed that computationally this phantom is very, let's say, computing demanding, because it has thousands and thousands and thousands of voxels. So now we have also the option to use meshed phantoms. These are still not released publicly with Jump4, but we hope to do it within the ends of this year, so anyone can use it, okay? But it's still work in progress. So now we can calculate the dose and dose equivalents also in this mesh phantom that computationally are more agile, let's say. And then we repeated our Jump4 simulation, and we calculated the dose in all the organs. So the first thing I would like that you notice is that in space, we look at the dose in various organs. For astronauts, we are really concerned with the eyes because of the risk of cataract, to the skin because of the radiation of burns, bone marrow because of leukemia, brain, because there has been a recent research done with rats that shows that if we are exposed to cosmic radiation, we think slower. So it's important to be able to determine the dose in the brain, in the heart, which is also an organ at risk, and in the reproductive apparatus because of possible genetic effects in the progeny. Then, I would like that you notice that for the International Space Station one-day mission scenario that we considered, the higher dose comes from trapped protons, and then galactic cosmic rays. Then this happens because we consider the worst case scenario for the trajectory of the International Space Station, that in this case just goes through the South Atlantic anomaly, and therefore there are more trapped protons there. Trapped protons are cosmic protons that have been trapped in the Van Allen belts, okay? And you can see that if we consider a male astronaut, actually there is a high dose in the prostate. So now we are redoing the simulation with the female astronauts, and we want to see the difference. Maybe female astronauts are better, who knows? Then we compared again for some organs, we compared our simulation results with some experimental measurements performed on the International Space Station. They took this plastic, let's say, anthropomorphic phantom called Matroska, and that has been attached to the International Space Station for 1 year. And they had sensors, TLD sensors, yes, we compared the experimental measurements to our simulation results, and again, we got a reasonable agreements. So now what we are doing now is to take the same model of anthropomorphic phantom, and we put him or her on the moon. So we will study the dose and dose equivalents there in that radiation environment. The last study that I'd like to show to you briefly, some for simulations that I've done to compare different shielding solutions in a mission to Mars. This is the design of a transfer vehicle from the Earth to Mars as proposed by Alenia Spazio, which is an Italian company that is based in Turin, in Italy. And this design includes an inner core, an inner shelter surrounded by a water equivalent wall. And then I will talk a little bit more about this, but it's the solar particle event shelter. And then this inner structure is surrounded by an inflatable balloon of hydrogen-rich materials. So I've been asked to evaluate the shielding of this balloon. And even if the result was that even if I double the shielding in my balloon, if I double it, I will stop just an extra few percent of galactic cosmic rays only. So I send more material in space, but actually by a radiation protection point of view, no change. And so remember that here we talk about the crucial point number 2 in radiation protection of astronauts. Everything that we, now 20 years ago, to send 1 kilogram of material to space was about 50,000 American dollars per kilo. Now it's $3,000 per kilogram, thanks to SpaceX. But still, we need to be cautious of how much material we send to space because it's still expensive, okay? So we need, so the problem here with galactic cosmic rays is that they are so high energy that at the end they just go through the shielding, okay? And so this is a passive shielding solution that is to use hydrogen-rich materials, But then a solution that is studied more and more is to use active magnetic fields. So to have a superconducting magnetic fields surrounding the transfer vehicle that divert the incident cosmic radiation. So I know that, yes, so let's say an hybrid solution, including both the passive and active shielding, is considered. And then finally, I had to evaluate the water equivalent thickness of the wall that protects the shelter, the solar particle event shelter. So in case of a solar particle event, astronauts have to recover inside this inner cylinder, okay? So I had to evaluate which thickness this wall needs to be in order to stop the solar particle events. And with the Jump4 simulation, I found that a 75 centimeter water equivalent wall actually stops all the solar particle events, almost all the solar particle events, and therefore it's definitely more safe. Finally, the last study is to evaluate lava tubes as a possible means, okay, to protect the astronauts, so build the shelters within lava tubes, which are natural tunnels which have been left over by volcanic activity. And in this case, I modeled the astronaut with the water phantom, with the water box, very fancy. And then I put it in a model of lava tube surrounded by regolith. And then I varied the thickness of the rooftop of the lava tube. And what I found out is that if we put a roof of a thickness 50 centimeter, actually that will offer as much protection as a typical shielding solution on the International Space Station. So lava tubes are really looked as an opportunity to build the shelters in maybe long-term missions, okay, on the Moon and Mars. So the last one that I'd like to show to you is the use of simulation to support the development of technology for space. As you may know, the director of my center, Professor Anatoly Rosenfeld, developed these silicon microdosimeters that allow to measure and then to measure the radiation effects in silicon sensitive volumes, which have a size of 10 micron, similar to an average cell, let's say. And it's 20 years that in our center we are developing this technology that nowadays is supported by the European Space Agency. And what we've done with the Jump4 simulations is to model it and then irradiate it in radiation fields of interest. So on one side, we use the simulations to characterize these detectors. These detectors are in silicon, are made of silicon, and we had to find a methodology to translate a dose equivalent in silicon to a dose equivalent in tissue. And we used the Monte Carlo simulations to identify and develop such a methodology that we currently use. And then these devices, during their development, they are also irradiated in nuclear facilities around the world. So what we do with our Jump4 simulations, we model the expected response. So it means that our postdocs or PhD students, when they go in nuclear facilities and irradiate our devices, more or less know what they should expect in their measurements. And this is important, again, to have a better understanding of the behavior of this novel technology. So in summary, Monte Carlo simulations for radiation physics are really useful tool for radiation protection of astronauts, but let me say, and as many of you know, allow us to solve problems in other domains like improve radiotherapy treatments, improve clinical imaging solutions, and so on. In order to improve the radiation protection of astronauts, we have to improve our understanding of the cosmic radiation, of its interactions with matter, with the biological medium. So it's a really work in progress, I would say. And finally, where to find me? So I'm the academic director of the Bachelor in Medical Radiation Physics of the University of Wollongong. This is my webpage, email, and Twitter, and that's where you can find me. That's all from me. Thank you very much. Do you have any question for me? Yes? Yes, Leah.
So the physics models that are included inside GIAN4,
yeah.
Do you think they are sufficient to investigate the interactions of matter?
This is a yeah, very difficult question. Okay, let's say that when we compare our simulation results to experimental measurements that we do in controlled situation in a nuclear facility up to few GeV of energy, it works. I mean, GIAN4 shows a good agreement with experimental measurements. Said this, I think we are safe, more or less, up to 1 GeV, okay? But then for energies above, we don't know. I mean, we need more benchmarking against experimental measurements. Now, below 1 GeV, as you know, there are 2 different approaches, or 3, binary, Bertini, okay, that describe the nuclear interactions. So our studies show that for radiation protection studies, the binary approach is the most accurate, while the Bertini, the so-called Bertini approach is more conservative. So it will tend to give you higher doses, higher dose equivalents, okay? So there is a lot, we work a lot on this field to validate the GIAN4 in terms of nuclear interactions. And the situation improved a lot in the last 10 years. So I would say, yes, up to 1 GeV using binary physics models. Now maybe 10, 15% of accuracy. Yes, something like that. Other questions? Yes, Dan.
The space station, what's the technology used to protect the astronauts?
They use hydrogen, so they have an aluminum layer, but then they have hydrogen, they have polyethylene. And then there is the magnetic field of the Earth, and they just stay 6 months. So that's, I mean, there are many measurements, they are constantly monitored, so it's safe there. Yes, Dan?
You mentioned that the galactic radiation has got a far higher energy values than the solar. Yet at the same time, you said the solar radiation pushes away the galactic.
That is the solar wind, yes.
So how does it do that if it's
so,
got less energy?
Okay, so the solar particle events that, okay, the solar wind has also other particles, okay, but the solar particle in general, this is information for physicists, solar particle events have, let's say, maximum energy, let's say it's 500 MeV per nucleon, okay? While when we talk about galactic cosmic rays, let's say the most probable is up to 10, 100 GeV per nucleon, okay? So 3 orders of magnitudes more energy. And then what happens is, you know, it's the pressure of the solar winds that pushes away the galactic cosmic rays. So still we have galactic cosmic rays, don't get me wrong, but their flux is reduced over 3-4 times with respect to the case of, during solar max, the flux is reduced of 3-4 times with respect to a case of solar minimum. Other questions? Yes, Justine.
Can we recycle all of our water bottles and put them on the space station.
Yeah, this is a great, yes. The fact is that the material must not deteriorate, okay? We need to be sure of, also the materials must go through a quality control. So I don't know if we, yes, maybe, who knows, maybe that would be a good way, just send our used plastic bottles in space. But I think we have really to pay attention to the quality control. One problem connected with polyethylene to be used in space is that it can be a little bit weak structurally. So I know there is a research also in our university that they try to use carbon nanotubes to make these shielding polyethylene structures more resistant. Yes. So maybe.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
What kind of magnetic field would you need to protect a space station on Mars? Like,
okay, yeah, this is I've seen some jump force simulation studies studying the magnetic field, and look, the magnetic field they study vary between 2 Tesla and 7 Tesla, which are very intense in my point of view. But this, yes, this is the range that they are considering.
and
Yeah.
what effect would that have on?
This is my question as well. I don't do directly research in active magnetic field shielding, shielding solution, but if you think about it, it's a very intense magnetic field. Basically, the astronauts, I don't know much, the technological aspect, but maybe they are in MRI, you know?
Be able to use your credit card on Mars, right?
No, you can't. No. So yes, and then there is the effects of the magnetic field on the electronics, because you need to have electronics sensors that are not sensitive to magnetic fields. So that opens up another, yes, another study, you know, other opportunities. Yes.
So then what's your estimate for when we will be able to fly to Mars safely and
safely is
a space station on Mars?
Look, I think that realistic is how long is that we talk about astronauts on Mars? It's at least since 2004, okay? So, and almost 20 years passed. So I think realistically, there is a lot of concern about astronauts' health and so on. So there are ethical problems, technological problems, but I think that the breakthrough, and in my point of view, my understanding and what I personally think is that instead the lunar outpost is a lot more feasible, okay? So I think let's proceed as a good physicist, step by step. So let's build a force and outpost on the moon. And then I suppose that there, the studies that will be done, then they will make us more confident than to take a more gigantic leap, let's say, towards Mars. But they say in the next, the documents say in the next decade, then who knows? Yes. Yeah.
I've got a question
Yes.
from the chat, sorry.
Yeah.
From Rowena, who's very knowledgeable in this area. She's been doing some work on human reproduction in space.
Yes.
And she's found your talk very interesting. One big concern is radiation risk for unborn and young children. Have you done any simulations on that?
No, not yet. For now, we done adults. We have phantoms for pediatric, let's say, astronauts. Maybe it's not now urgent now, but I suppose, you know, if we really go to Mars, who knows, build a colony within 100 years, I suppose that this is, yes, she's right, or is right, that this is a problem that will need to be studied. Because a problem is the genetic problems to the progeny. Absolutely. And the problem is that we have, for problems to the progeny, our biggest database, let's say, comes still from the survivors of the bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So, I mean, our knowledge is still very limited in that sector as well. So good, very good question. Dan?
Yeah, I was just wondering, with the discovery of the neutron, we had a neutron hitting a hydrogen-rich material to eject a proton. So why does a hydrogen-rich material protect us? Is you've got a sort of high-energy proton going into that material, why doesn't it knock something else out?
So when you have high energy, yes, you can produce it. When you have a cosmic radiation, can produce this shower of nuclear fragments, including neutrons. So you have, if you have a hydrogen-rich material, you are right, a neutron scatters with a proton, hydrogen-rich, and actually may transfer all its energy to a proton. So actually hydrogen-rich material are more effective to moderate and stop neutrons, which again can produce harmful effects in the astronauts. Yes, so the mechanism is that one. Yes, Liam?
I'm curious about some of your simulations of solar particle events. How did you simulate the solar particle field? Did you assume it was isotropic?
Yes, so the model that we got is from SPANVIS. SPANVIS is a tool that has been developed, let's say, by Belgium University. Now, sorry, I don't remember the name, but it's supported from many years by the European Space Agency. And you can download the spectra. And galactic cosmic rays, we know they are isotropic, okay? Solar particle events, actually, they are not, we model them, and it's a common practice to model them as isotropic, but actually they have some directionality. And we usually consider the worst case scenario. So we look at galactic cosmic rays during solar minimum, and we look at solar particle events in solar maximum. So when we do radiation protection studies, but also north, we are always in the worst condition scenario. So you're doing simulations for space, Liam? Excellent.
Still developing my software.
You can use the radio protection advanced example.
Yeah.
Yes?
Another question in the chat. If hydrogen-rich materials are optimal to shield against neutrons, why is polyethylene used rather than just using a layer of hydrogen gas to shield against radiation?
No, because, yes, because it's solid. Actually, polyethylene is a lot more easy, okay, to have a gas system, or is a lot more complex, let's say, by technological point of view. It's better just to have a chunk, let's say, of solid material. That is the reason. That's all? 1 hour talk killed you.
Well, I would like to again thank Susana for joining us tonight and telling us all about. I mean, you guys will be young enough to go to Mars. I won't be.
Maybe on the moon.
Maybe on the moon. No, I still won't get to the moon. You will, I'm sure. But yes, if you could join me again. Thanking Susana for her talk and coming all the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you to everybody online.
Yeah. Can I say hello?
That's the camera there.
Bye. Thank you.